It's a shocking fall from grace in less than a year. P. Diddy went from beloved music icon to disgraced sexual predator, at least according to the charges from the feds right now. He's behind bars in New York, the same place where just last year he was given a key to the city. It was a disturbing set of allegations that led to Diddy's arrest in the way of multiple civil suits brought by accusers, and in some of those suits, co-defendants are listed, and in others, celebrities. Could it be a time of reckoning for them too? We're taking a deep dive into all the celebrities listed in Diddy civil lawsuit and whether they too could face federal charges. I'm Sierra Gillespie, and this is Law&Crime News. A groundbreaking case brought forth just this week when 54-year-old Shah Diddy Combs was arrested on September 15th. He now faces some pretty serious federal charges: racketeering, conspiracy, trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. Diddy was indicted by a federal grand jury and is now being held in Brooklyn at the Metropolitan Detention Center after he was twice denied bail. Diddy's attorneys say he was in New York for about a week before the arrest, anticipating the federal indictment, but he wasn't the only one who kind of saw this coming. After federal investigators raided two of Diddy's homes back in March, we kind of had an idea something was on the way. Just this week, we learned some of the items that investigators collected during those raids of Diddy's homes in both Miami and Los Angeles. According to the indictment against Diddy, investigators seized more than 1,000 bottles of baby oil and lubricants from his homes. The court states that these items were used in something referred to as freak-offs, which were elaborate and produced sex performances that Combs arranged, directed, masturbated during, and often electronically recorded. According to prosecutors, Diddy and his associates transported commercial sex workers over state lines and even international. Diddy then allegedly gave these sex workers and victims controlled substances, at times unannounced, to the victims. Prosecutors say Diddy did this to keep the victims obedient and compliant. He then took videos of victims having sex with these sex workers, sometimes without their consent. After all this, both Diddy and the victims would receive IV fluids to recover from the physical exertion and drug use. Federal investigators say that during the raids of Diddy's homes, they collected some of these recordings, showing the disturbing details of these freak-offs, and the feds had a heads up about these recordings. Thanks to some of the civil lawsuits filed against Diddy, namely the one brought by Rodney Jones, also known as the producer Lil Rod. Lil Rod worked with Diddy on his Love album starting in 2022 and says he experienced months of abuse all at the hands of Diddy. In his lengthy civil suit, Lil Rod refers to these recordings, saying, quote, "required Mr. Jones," that's Lil Rod, to record him constantly. Mr. Jones has secured hundreds of hours of footage and audio recordings of Mr. Combs, his staff, and his guests engaging in some serious legal activity. Lil Rod's lawsuit also lays out some other pretty disturbing claims, like that Diddy sexually assaulted him and forced Lil Rod to have sex with a prostitute. But Lil Rod's lawsuit came out swinging in more ways than one. Not only did it shed light on the dark allegations against Diddy, but it dropped some high-profile celebrity names too. First, there's Academy Award-winning actor Cuba Gooding Jr. Lil Rod alleges Diddy was, quote, grooming him to pass him off to his friends. This fear became reality when Mr. Combs introduced Mr. Jones to Cuba Gooding Jr. while they were on Mr. Combs' yacht. The lawsuit includes pictures of this too, showing both Diddy with Cuba and then Cuba with his arms around Lil Rod. Court go on to say, quote, Cuba Gooding Jr. began touching, groping, and fondling Mr. Jones's legs, his upper inner thighs near his groin, and the small of his back near his buttocks and his shoulders. He rejected his advances, and Mr. Gooding Jr. did not stop until Mr. Jones forcibly pushed him away. Here's former prosecutor Melba Pearson. In the last couple of years, there were allegations against him for sexual assault, so now we had those prior allegations, and now we see him tied to this case as allegedly trying to, assault, assault others back in on misdemeanor charges of forcible touching
and no longer
sexual
has a
abuse
voice who will pursue
allegedly
justice
groping
for her accusation.
a woman in Times Square. By the
As
next
of the
year,
taken against
3
Diddy,
women had come forward
no expansion
accusing
of the
him
investigation,
of non-consensual
no isolation
sexual
orders,
touching. No
eventually
equipment
reached a plea
access,
deal
no
with
suspension of
prosecutors
attorney
that required
communication.
6 months of counseling,
Everything inside
but no
solitary
jail
block
time.
C
Just
continued
this
as
summer,
before.
he appeared
Everything
on Dan
except
Abrams'
the
Live,
fear.
where he
If
discussed
a female
those
warden
charges
can
when he
vanish after
pleaded
a
guilty
single
to a
nothing
forcible
except the
touching
fear.
misdemeanor
If a
in
female warden
2022,
can vanish after a
eventually
single
led to a
note,
guilty
ones who
plea of a
once
lesser
worked
charge.
overnight in that
A
area.
year later, you
The ones who
settled the federal
filed for
civil
leave without
lawsuit,
giving a
2 more
reason.
civil
The ones who
misconduct
saw but never
lawsuits.
spoke.
Can you
No one
understand why
mentions the
some
note.
would say,
But everyone
don't want
knows
to
it
cast this
appeared.
guy?
And if
Sure,
what it says
but
is
I can
true,
also
then
understand
punishment.
some people
Part
who come up
3.
to me in the
The
street
person no
all
longer
the
in the
time and
system.
yell,
The internal
"Show me the
personnel
money," and
database
say,
of the
"Hang in
Atlanta
there
Federal
and I see
Detention
what you're
Center
going
updated
through."
its weekly
You know,
roster.
you make movies
Under
for
the
an audience
category
of
Special
people,
Personnel
right?
Code
Right
Adjustment.
now.
The name of
I'm
Warden
making a movie
TD was
for
marked as
faith-based
removed
people
from
who are
system by
excited to
administrative
renew our
order.
hope in humanity,
There was no decision number
especially
recorded,
the times
but
we're
was
in dealing with
deactivated.
politics
Her
and the
personal
world
contact
issues that
information
are going
disappeared
on.
from the
So
internal
that's
network
where I am
exactly
now.
36
And have you
hours
expressed
after she
regret,
filed her
sorrow,
complaint.
apologies
The
for what
change log
happened
was
previously.
executed from the
Everything that
system's
happens in
highest
my
access
life
level
is for a
server,
reason.
a device
I
bearing the
believe that, and
identifier
if I continue to walk
DCCA1,
on my
located
path,
in the
whatever
coordination
that
office
is,
on the 4th
I know at
floor
the
of the
end
Security
result, it'll
Administration
be to
Wing.
make me stronger, to
Only
be a better
2
person,
individuals
to be
possess
a
the
better
authority to
father.
perform
You know,
a
and right
system-level
now,
personnel
that's
removal
the
at
moment
that
I'm
tier,
in.
the
Back
head
to
of
Melba,
Federal Human
says it's
Resources
possible that
and
charges
Detention
could be
Center.
brought against the actor.
No confirmation
I am getting
exists
the
as
feeling
was
where
made.
there's smoke,
The
there's
removal of
fire,
Warden
right?
TD's
Because
name was
now
not
we have 2
accompanied by
different
any
instances
or
where
protective
you're accused of
reassignment.
the same type of behavior.
At 11:20
You know,
a.m.,
years
a
apart,
printed copy of the personnel
think there's
deployment
something
chart was
there,
generated
and I
in
don't know that
preparation
Cooper
for the new
Jr.
week's schedule.
is going to escape
Under the
from
section
that
marked
one
Internal
because he already
Alert,
saw
TD's
definitely
name
people moving away from him within Hollywood circles and other circles once those first sexual assault allegations came out. So at this point, I don't think he's going to get away with it a second time. Is it possible that he could face charges based on these allegations that were brought forward by Lil Rod? It is possible as well. Again, we've got the statute of limitations issue to deal with. So depending on the time frame of when this happened is, you know, again, the Adult Survivors Act, which was the vehicle where many these lawsuits came out when, if these civil law school suits, came out, there was a thin out amount of time for those suits to be filed. The time frame is going to be very, very important. What witnesses come forward, because again, you know, this may not be a situation where DNA may be at play. This may be more of a situation of, hey, yes, I was there, and I recall, you know, Cuba Jing Jr., you know, putting his hands on the L-Rod, or I, you know, recall certain aspects. So it's going to be a very witness-intensive type of case. And the question is, will witnesses be willing to come forward? Another high-profile name listed in Lil Rod's lawsuit is Jennifer Lopez, from the standpoint of the names of the celebrities that were tied to this. The fact that Jennifer Lopez was tied to this back when she was involved in a party to a shooting at a club when she was dating Diddy, and is now alleged to have brought the gun with her to the scene and gave it to Diddy, and that's how the shooting occurred. Lil Rod's team brings up J-Lo when establishing Diddy's history, writing his, quote, Rico enterprise has existed for at least 20, dating back to the 1999 nightclub shooting in NYC when Mr. Comas required his then-girlfriend Jennifer Lopez to transport his illegal firearm into the NYC nightclub. The court do also allege Diddy forced his then-artist Shine to assume responsibility for the shooting of several individuals. Shooting happened on December 27, 1999, at about 2:55 a.m. A fight broke out at a nightclub in New York City between Diddy Jamal Barrow, who's known as the rapper Shine, and Matthew Allen, who went by the nickname Scar Guns, were drawn and 3 people were shot. No one suffered any life-threatening injuries, and the victims were not involved in the fight. J-Lo and Diddy fled from the scene in a car, but were later arrested and charged. J-Lo's charges were dropped, but the others stuck. Diddy was acquitted, but Shine was sentenced to 10 years in prison. He was released in 2009 and deported back to his home country. Of police, Lil Rod alleges it was Diddy who pulled the trigger, and Shine just took the fall for him. Because of this allegation, experts like former FBI agent Bobby Chone say investigators could take a second look at the shooting if there's a civil lawsuit that lays out this major allegation. What would it take to reopen an investigation into something that happened 25 years ago? Well, it would take it, it would take a different look at it. So, in other words, he was acquitted on the state murder charges. Now federal charges can be different. You can have RICO. You can have a continuing criminal enterprise. You can have the underlying acts, the predicate acts, if we used to call them, when I worked RICO cases, a RICO predicate act could be something like that, 1999 case, and you can use it as a predicate act. You can bring it up in, when I worked cold cases of this type, sometimes with the passage of time, people aren't as intimidated, and they're not as threatened, and they get away from the person who was the threat, and they feel more forthcoming to testify or to give statements in testimony. But certainly, I think that that case is going to be part of it, in the aftermath of that. They have witnesses that say he bragged about intimidating witnesses, paying off jurors, certain, when you have that kind of stuff. If you go back and you find that juror that was paid off, or jurors, multiple, that may have been paid off, certainly that gives you the impetus to kind of come forward and refresh those charges on a federal case. So the federal cases will be a little different. The charges are a little different. So it's not double jeopardy. And so I think that that case that you mentioned, that you cite, I think is certainly one of the ones they're looking to build into a much bigger, to me, maybe a RICO type case. We also know that federal investigators have spoken to other plaintiffs in civil cases against Diddy to learn more about his personality and what he's like in relationships. That means J-Lo is someone the feds will want to talk to if they haven't already. It also means she could be called to testify against him. It's possible. It's absolutely possible. If I was the prosecutor handling that case, I absolutely would list her, right? But of course we need to know whether or not she'd be cooperative. That of course changes the strategy when it comes to trial. So you may list someone as a potential witness. That does not mean you're necessarily going to call them. The question is whether or not their going to testimony is really going to help you. But there is a universe where she could testify against him in terms of, violence, in terms of his interactions with other artists, especially the folks that have been coming forward, alleging that he has harmed them in some way or engaged in, human trafficking and sex trafficking. So was she aware of any of that going on? Did she see him with underage girls, or was she present for when some of those videos were taken? That little rod included screenshots of those videos in his pleadings. So how much of that did she, when did she know it? And what actions did she take at the time? Is that part of the reason why they broke up? We don't know. So all of this will to be seen. Obviously, the prosecution and law enforcement need to speak with her, get a statement from her to understand what she knows or what she'd be able to testify to, and then make appropriate decisions from there. But it's not just artists that Lil Rod named. Either he specifically mentioned Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, in Socks. It reads in part, quote, Mr. Coleman's was known for throwing the best parties, affiliation with and/or sponsorship. Mr. Combs' sex trafficking parties garner legitimacy and access to celebrities
present,
such as
and no longer
athletes,
has a voice who will pursue
figures,
justice
artists,
for her accusation.
Musicians, and international
As of the taken against Diddy, no expansion of the investigation, no isolation orders, no equipment access, no suspension of attorney communication. Everything inside solitary block C continued as before. Everything except the fear. If a female warden can vanish after a single note, except the fear. If a female warden can vanish after a single note, ones who once worked overnight in that area, the ones who filed for leave without giving a reason, the ones who saw but never spoke, no one mentions the note, but everyone knows it appeared. And if what it says is true, then punishment. Part 3.
horrible things
The person
were
no
happening.
longer in the
So,
system. The internal
fact that
personnel
Prince
database
Harry
of the
was there
Atlanta Federal
does not
Detention Center
necessarily
updated
mean
its
he was
weekly roster.
participating in
Under
what
the
was
category
happening.
Special
And just
Personnel
because
Code
you were at a
Adjustment,
party
the name
doesn't
of
mean
Warden
you know what's
TD was
happening
marked
in
as
every inch
removed
of the
from
house.
system by
I mean, if you
administrative
think
order.
about it,
There
if
was
the
no
part is
decision
being
number
thrown
recorded.
in a
It was
mansion, there are
deactivated.
various floors
Her
and
personal
ways.
contact
So,
information
it is
disappeared from the
completely
internal
possible
network
that he
exactly
was there and did
36
not
hours after she
participate.
filed her
Now you had
complaint.
said Prince
The
Andrew,
changelog was
especially as
executed
a
from the
result
system's
of the
highest
allegations
access
that
level
came out
server,
in
a device
connection
bearing
with
the identifier
E-scene case, that
DCCA1,
they were close
located
and
in
that
the
they
coordination
traveled
office on the
together.
4th floor of the
And,
Security
there was a
Administration
person
Wing.
that alleged
Only
that he
2
had,
individuals
had
possess the
sexually
authority to
assaulted
perform
her
a system-level
while she was
personnel
underage.
removal
That
at
would
that
be a
tier,
different
the
story.
head of
But
Federal
Prince
Human
Harry
Resources
and the way that
and
it
Detention
was
Center.
mentioned seemed to be
No
very,
confirmation
again,
exists
just
as
sort of
was made.
trying to
The removal
bring
of Warden
legitimacy
TD's
and
name was
talk
not
about
accompanied
these
by
were the
any
people that
or protective
that did
reassignment.
it. He surrounded
At
himself
11:20
by to
a.m., a
protect
printed
himself.
copy of the
Prince
personnel
Harry
deployment chart
has
was
no
generated
criminal
in preparation
charges
for the
or
new
even
week's
any
schedule.
accusations
Under
of
the section
illegal
marked
activity,
Internal
but he
Alert,
could still see
TD's
the
name
inside of a courtroom in a defamation case. It's possible that Prince Harry may be able to preserve his reputation, and since it was such a minuscule mention in the greater context of this filing, he may be okay. Another celebrity mentioned in Lil Rod's lawsuit is Young Miami, who dated Diddy from 20. The lawsuit, Young Miami's cousin assaulted Lil Rod during the Thanksgiving holiday in 2020, similar to Prince Harry. There are no allegations against Young Miami herself, so there's probably no worry of charges being filed against her, but there could be charges against some of the other people listed in Lil Rod's lawsuit. That's people like Diddy's chief of staff, Christina Coram, who Lil Rod compares to Ghislaine Maxwell, the longtime companion of Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein died by suicide in 2019 when he faced numerous charges of sexual assault over the course of multiple years. Maxwell was charged and found guilty of sex trafficking in relation to her time with Epstein, and she is currently serving a lengthy prison sentence. Lil Rod says Christina Coram ordered sex workers and prostitutes for Mr. Coleman's and ordered and distributed ecstasy, cocaine, GHB, ketamine, marijuana, and mushrooms to Mr. Coleman's and his celebrity guests who were present on his rented yacht and his homes in Miami. This is referenced in Diddy's indictment, too, saying members and associates of the Combs enterprise, including high-ranking supervisors, security staff, household staff, staff personal assistants, and other Combs business employees, facilitated the freak-offs by, among other things, booking hotel room for the freak-offs, stocking the hotel rooms in advance with the required freak-off supplies, including controlled substances, baby oil, lubricant, extra linens, and lighting. Federal prosecutors also alleged these associates arranged travel for victims and commercial sex workers, delivered large sums of cash to Diddy to pay these sex workers, and even scheduled the delivery of IV fluid. So, according to Melba, it's possible some of these associates are charged too. None of these cases, when you have these high-profile people that have been using people over years, these cases happen without a Kelly had a handler. Epstein had a handler. Weinstein had a handler. Everybody has in those scenarios of those powerful people, powerful men that are abusing other people. They have someone that does their dirty work. And it's usually not only just one person. It's several people who may have different duties. So, again, seeing this woman being his handler, being the person to get him drugs, being the person to procure sex workers for him, being the person to basically be on cleanup duty in case of, covering up or silencing people that might want to come forward. That's not unusual. And she is also going to bear the brunt of criminal liability, just like Ghislaine Maxwell did, and basically had to take the entire brunt of the criminal justice system alone because of the fact that, Epstein committed suicide and was not able to be held accountable. And we can't talk about Diddy without mentioning Cassie, the one whose lawsuit blew the lid off Diddy's alleged scheme. She filed civil suit against Diddy last November, under the New York Survivor Act, meaning any sexual assault survivor could file suit against their predator, and the statute of limitation didn't matter. Cassie's lawsuit was settled just one day after it was filed, but it was still made public, dropping a laundry list of bombshells about Diddy that the public hadn't previously heard. Cassie's lawsuit outlined years of abuse by Diddy. Starting, she was just 19 years old, and at the time he was 37. According to her suit, Diddy was prone to uncontrollable rage and frequently beat Cassie savagely. Cassie alleged he forced her to use drugs and would physically beat her or force her to have sex with prostitutes. Then there's the gun allegation that, on at least 2 occasions, Diddy demanded Cassie hold his gun in her purse. The lawsuit goes on to state, quote, "There was no clear reason why Mr. Combs required her to hold his guns, except to reinforce to his young girlfriend that he was violent, powerful, and dangerous." This echoes similar allegation made by Lil Rod about Jennifer Lopez's part in the 1999 New York nightclub shooting. Not only did Jennifer Lopez allegedly bring the gun to the club, now we're also looking at, years later, Cassie coming forward and saying that Diddy forced her to carry a gun with her when they went out to different events. So, again, I think that this is more along the lines of when you look at this from a domestic violence lens, from the standpoint of the abuser being very controlling and demanding certain activities to prove loyalty to, basically put yourself in a bad situation. Only he can be the one to save you, basically. So in seeing that, the parallels between J-Lo's experience and Cassie's experience, number one, it brings more credibility to what Cassie said in her pleadings, but also, again, it causes us to look at Jennifer Lopez and be like, some of the comments she made about the end of her relationship to Diddy, in terms of, well, there was infidelity, and, she kind of skirted the issue a bit. But when you start to look back at your comments, you start to think, oh, were you in a domestic violence relationship with Diddy? Much like how Cassie ended up in a domestic violence relationship with him. Cassie kind of broke the floodgate, so to speak, when she made her civil suit back in November. These crazy allegations, we'd never heard anything like it before. And then all of a sudden we have several more people coming forward, and then more. It turns to 2024. So we have multiple plaintiffs who are coming forward, alleging very similar things. I'm wondering, without these civil suits, would we even be here right now? Would Diddy even have been arrested and indicted? I really don't think so. I really don't think so, because Cassie's loss opened the floodgates, and I think it empowered other survivors to come forward and tell their story. And when Lil Rod came forward,
present,
I think that
and
was
no
just
longer
another
has a voice who will pursue justice for her accusation.
In this case,
as of the taken against Diddy, no expansion of the investigation, no isolation orders, no equipment access, no suspension of attorney communication. Everything inside solitary block C continued as before. Everything except the fear. If a female warden can vanish after a single nothing except the fear. If a female warden can vanish after a single note, ones who once worked overnight in that area, the ones who filed for leave without giving a reason, the ones who saw but never spoke. No one mentions the note, but everyone knows it appeared. And if what it says is true, then punishment. Part 3. The person no longer in the system. The internal personnel database of the Atlanta Federal Detention Center updated its weekly roster. Under the category Special Personnel Code Adjustment, the name of Warden TD was marked as removed from system by administrative order. There was no decision number recorded. It was deactivated. Her personal contact information disappeared from the internal network exactly 36 hours after she filed her complaint. The changelog was executed from the system's highest access level server, a device bearing the identifier DCCA1, located in the coordination office on the 4th floor of the Security Administration wing.
Each of those people
Only 2 individuals possess the authority to perform a system-level personnel removal at that tier, the head of Federal Human Resources and Detention Center. No confirmation exists a patient was made. The removal of Warden TD's name was not accompanied by any or protective reassignment. At 11:20 a.m., a printed copy of the personnel deployment chart was generated in preparation for the new week's schedule. Under the section marked Internal Alert, TD's name
in the grand jury hearing that would ultimately indict Diddy, but it's likely at least some of his accusers did. I do believe that a number of the survivors would have testified. I don't think that they would have brought all of them because of the fact that, number one, you want to testifying is traumatizing, especially when you're talking about the most awful day, likely of your life, and some very degrading things that happen to you, and you have to tell that to a bunch of people you don't know. So you have to be very cautious in when and how to bring your victims and your survivors to testify, and think about that in terms of your strategy, because again, you may want to save some of the survivors for the actual trial, if this does go to trial, and maybe just pick 1 or 2 that make the point, right? And then you can fill it in evidence as the trial proceeds, but you don't necessarily have to show all of your evidence to the grand jury. You just pick the strongest pieces of evidence so that, again, you're not burning your survivors out before they get to the point of trial unnecessarily. Obviously, they do have to testify and, tell their story so that the jury has something to liberate on. But at the same token, you don't want to push them too much because, again, that trauma is very real. And even if they are getting assistance through counseling or something along those lines, still a lot to have to talk about it, especially in such a with the huge media frenzy around it. And, so many people weighing in, and whether it be social media or other celebrities or things like that. So those are some of the things the U.S. attorney would have been considering when deciding who should be brought in front of the grand jury to testify. And when it comes time for trial, we could expect to hear from Cassie or other accusers in federal court. You're bringing up a really good point. Because, as you said, this is probably one of the darkest times of these survivors' lives, and they have to come forward with these serious allegations and relive the trauma that I'm sure they've been working to overcome. It's really tough, but we're assuming that a lot of them are going to testify at the trial, whenever that may be, and there are several accusers that to go through and do all of that. What would it look like at the trial then? At the trial now, the key is that the U.S. Attorney's Office has to make sure that they're not going too far afield with that character evidence. We saw how that kind of backfired in the Harvey Weinstein case, where, as well as Bill Cosby case, where other instances were brought in that were maybe not as close in time, or more so, not really enlightening the jury about what happened in the charges that were in the indictment, but more so, he's just a really bad, horrible, predatory person. That may be the truth. However, when it comes to proving the charges at hand, you have to be very focused on making sure the jury understands what happened during the time frames that are specified in the indictment. And so if some of these other survivors, let's say something happened 10 years ago, that might be too far in time for them to be able to testify. But if we're talking about an instance of something that happened last year, for instance, that might be closer in time to allow them to be able to testify. And again, if they have specific knowledge about certain aspects of the indictment, of course they'll be brought to testify. But again, you have to be very cautious because you want to be able to preserve, if you're able to get a conviction, you want to be able to preserve it on appeal by not making these types of errors after his indictment. This week, Diddy pleaded not guilty to all charges and was denied bond twice. A statement from his legal team reads, quote, Diddy is a music icon, self-made entrepreneur, loving family man, and proven philanthropist who has spent the last 30 years building an empire, adoring his children, and working to uplift the Black community. He is an imperfect person, but is not criminal. To his credit, Mr. Combs has been nothing but cooperative with this investigation, and he voluntarily relocated to New York last week in anticipation of these charges. Please reserve your judgment until you have all the facts. These are the acts of an innocent man with nothing to hide, and he looks forward to clearing his name in court. More updates are sure to come in the case of United States versus Diddy, so make sure to subscribe to our YouTube page so you don't miss a thing. Reporting for Law Crime, I'm Sierra Gillespie.